Hey, I'm Ben Yenny, and I don't make movies. I help filmmakers make money from their movies. Today we're talking about development funds. Let's get started. So, in order to have a productive discussion on how to raise development funds, we should first start with why raising development funds is so important. And the big reason is that if you have a movie with a budget of more than $250,000, you're going to need some level of package in order to raise the funds you need to actually make the movie. And that generally isn't free. It costs money to hire a casting director. It costs money to hire somebody to help you get distribution in advance. It costs money to do a whole lot of things you're definitely going to need to do, including even simple things like generating the documents you need or filing a PPM with the SEC. More on that in a different video, though. In general, there are about count them, three things you need to make a feature film. You need money, which generally at least a portion of comes from investors. You need recognizable name talent in order to help market the movie and help it be discovered. And finally, you need some level of distribution plan. If it's a film of above about $200,000, maybe $250,000, you're probably going to need a professional distributor to help because there will be platforms you cannot access on your own as a filmmaker. Also, distributors do tend to have a little bit more traction with the bigger chains in bigger places you really need to be. So each stakeholder has different needs. Investors need a business plan, an executable plan the filmmakers can follow to give them the best chance at getting their money back. The filmmakers also need to know the investors also need to know that the filmmakers have the ability to get the film into the marketplace, as well as an audience to help actually, buy it, so that the investor can get their money back. And finally, at the end of the day, they need to know that this filmmaker is going to create a piece of work that can actually be marketed and is marketable. This means that it needs to hit a certain quality threshold in order to compete in this vastly overcrowded marketplace that we find ourselves in as filmmakers, distributors, and everything else. Distributors need to understand the addressable audience that the film can reach. And they need to generally have some way of reaching that audience. As an example, a lot of distributors understand that there are wide diasporas of various countries throughout the US, but they don't have a direct way to reach them. As such, very niche films that only target certain diasporas or immigrant communities are generally very hard sells. Pardon me. They also generally want recognizable name talent. Now, that feeds into the audience because most of this recognizable name talent brings with them an addressable audience. The distributors want you to have a marketing plan because distributors are more and more just providing access to the platforms and acting as gatekeepers, and filmmakers must often push their own work, especially at the lower levels. This is true for independent authors, by the way. And conveniently, That's part of why I make these videos. You can see that one of my books right there. But and the other thing that a distributor needs to come on early on is that they need to know that the film will be of high enough quality to distribute once it's done. What does that mean in practice? Well, it essentially means that the team behind the film needs to have a track record at least a couple films long. Or at least the key positions need to have that track record. And what does recognizable name talent need? They need to make sure that the film will actually be made. They need to make sure that the film is distributed once it's made. And above all else, they generally need to know that they're going to be paid. They don't want to forego other paying work in order to do your project if your project never goes. At the end, they also want to make sure the end product is marketable. Not just made, but won't be a total bomb at the box office, or won't end up in places where it's never ever seen again. Part of this is making sure that the film is high quality. The long and short of this is that everyone wants to reduce risk. The name of the game here is reducing risk. So, each stakeholder gets you something and gets you a piece of that puzzle. Investors get you money, and they also often get you connections. They can make introductions that you would not be able to make yourself. Distributors get you access to marketplaces you cannot reach on your own. I understand that self-distribution is big, and I understand that especially for transactional video on demand, and even some manufacturer on demand DVD outlets, you can reach them on your own as a filmmaker, and you can move tens of thousands of units in some cases. These are the exceptions, not the rule. And also, even if you have made those sorts of big, high-ticket sales, you still probably can't get on any of the SVOD platforms, that subscription video on demand platforms that you really want to be on. You generally need to have somebody on the inside who can actually make an introduction and really pitch the movie for you. Especially at an early stage. And in the end, by providing this heightened access, they can also help you make bigger profits, even though they take a piece of it. Now, nobody here is saying that every distributor or every sales agent or every producer's rep is well-intentioned, we'll say. But the same can be said for self-distribution platforms. Look at the debacles that just happened with Distributor and Tug. You more need to know what you're getting into than you need to try to reduce every aspect of risk. It's more about managing risk than getting rid of it entirely. So recognizable name talent is a big way to help manage that risk because they bring with them a huge audience. If you bring with you a huge and engaged audience, that will help with this. Generally, recognizable name talent will help you with it even more. They provide a huge sense of validation, and they can really act as a megaphone to make sure your message and your film gets out there significantly farther than you would be able to get it out there by yourself. The other thing that recognizable name talent really does is help you get trade press and press in general, because these people already have their audiences. And really, press is one of the most efficient ways to both validate and market your film. And yourself, really. So, how do you go about getting all of these? Because they're each really interdependent on each other. And the best way I've been able to see it is to raise a small development round of around 5 to 10% of your total budget in order to package it well enough to get everything else you need. Because the recognizable name talent will often require a pay or play agreement or some level of money involved. The distributors need the team and the talent already in place, and the investors need both of those things to give any large amount of money. So if you can raise a small enough amount of money to get the recognizable name talent and the distributors on board, it's much, much easier to get the investors. That's not to say that it will be easy, but it's much more an attainable goal if you have the other pieces already in place. So, like I said, that solution is just to get around 5 to 10% of your entire budget in order to package your movie. So where do you get this money? And that's really the million, or hopefully not million, more like $50,000 to $100,000 question. And I can't give you an address to go to get this money. If I could, I probably wouldn't be making YouTube videos right now. But the sad fact of that matter is it doesn't really exist. The best I can do is give you a framework of different types of money you can get and a loose idea of where you can get those types of money around you. Now, I did this in another video called the 10 Ways to Finance Your Independent Film, and I'm going to try to put it, I believe the card would be up here. But there are some more realistic ways to get first money in, because not all of these are good for development funds. These ones are. And the best order to go in for this, to get the development funds you need to package your film to the level at which it can actually make money, are from donation-based crowdfunding as well as friends and family. Those two often go hand in hand these days. Then development stage grants. These are really hard to get, but they are possible. I know the Kenneth Rainin Foundation still does development round grants. Then you're probably going to have to put some level of money in yourself. And that's where your skin in the game comes from. And if you already have some amount of money in, even if you can't do the entire round yourself, you're going to need to talk to equity investors. But this is not going to be a totally easy raise. The other thing you'll have to keep in mind is if you talk to equity investors, you're going to need to incentivize them a little bit more now than you would in the big round, because they're taking a proportionately bigger risk right now. Let's go a little bit more into this. So crowdfunding, the pros and cons. Pros are that it's money you don't have to pay back. But the con is it's not easy to raise. It's a strong route into your early adopters and core audience. It's a huge pro. What I mean by this is it's a route in to market your film once it's done, which will help overcome your investor objections later on. But if you're not raising the entire budget for your film in one round, crowdfunders and donors can get a little antsy about what's going to happen if you don't get the money you need to actually finish the film. And finally, the problem and the good thing about having the crowdfunding campaign is that it can provide a very, very, very valuable proof of concept and provide what we call market validation, which is a fancy way of saying people will watch this movie because they're already engaged with it and we have barely more than a script right now. But conversely, if you can't prove that there is that core audience, a failed campaign could look like a failure of market validation and a failure of concept, therefore making it significantly harder to raise money. Closely related to crowdfunding is the friends and family raise. The benefits of it are that these people are going to require less stringent qualifications than an equity investor or grantor would require from you. But it's not so much that the qualifications they need from you are completely less stringent. It's more that they're different. And anybody... Also, there are a fair amount of American families who just don't have the money to give you. That's why making them a part of your crowdfunding campaign is better than just making them than just trying to raise the round entirely from your close friends and family. And they probably want you to succeed. And they probably want to help you do it. But the con is, depending on how much money they give you, it can change your relationship quite a lot. And when dealing with money from your close friends and family, it just has a tendency to get complicated. So grants. The biggest benefit is that it's money you don't have to pay back. But it doesn't tend to come quickly. If you want money a year or two from now, you might want to start applying for grants now. And it can be a future source for funding. If you are a filmmaker, you are going to need reliable sources of funding for the rest of your career. Getting in good with the right foundations can essentially do that for you. But that while that might not be exactly common knowledge, it's pretty close to it. So these grants can get extremely competitive, especially in the early stages. Equity. The pros. I don't know why I put that it's hard to find, especially at this stage. As a pro, it should be a con. But it's even harder to close at this stage. And it's extremely expensive as well. How can money be expensive? Well, the biggest thing is they're going to get a bigger piece of your pie. They're going to take a greater ownership in the film for each dollar they invest at this stage than they would later on if you actually want to close them. Not every filmmaker thinks this way, but you really should, because if you invest incredibly early at something like, let's say, Twitter, you're buying at the current valuation, even if you end up selling at a much higher valuation. Valuation doesn't really exist in independent film, but you can compensate by giving them a bit more equity in order to get the round raised. But one major benefit to this is if you can get a development round investor, they may be more likely to actually help you get the funding you need at later stages. This isn't something I do for my clients currently, at least not directly, but I do tend to help my previous and my previous clients actually move their future projects forward as well. And I'm not an investor myself, but I do make connections where it's appropriate. But generally, only with people I've worked with in the past for an extended period of time. So I know them and I know how they work. Because anytime I make an introduction, it's a pretty high level endorsement of what you're doing. And finally, skin in the game. It's the fastest sort of money you can get. You just whip out your, hopefully not credit card, and or definitely, hopefully not a second mortgage on your house. But you can get it in a matter of minutes or a matter of weeks in general. Problem is, you might not have the money to actually invest in this, which is why you wanted to raise it in other ways. Another pro is that it's your money. It's always been your money, and you can spend it how you want. And you might not need to get it back if you're doing extremely well for yourself. But the con is, if you lose it, you're out your money. I'm thinking about getting a soundboard for this channel, or a couple of clips that I can play here. And what I'd really like to play there is a clip from The Producers with Nathan Lane saying, "Never invest your own money!" But no, you do actually have to sometimes. And it can be the most expedient way to do this at this stage. Thank you guys so much for watching. Check back next week. I'm actually going to be dropping a video on stage financing for independent films, which will talk not only about the development stage, but also about about all the other stages of film finance as well. If you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. If this all seems like a little bit too much for you, I do take on development stage clients. You can do that through the submit link directly on the left over there, right? Not sure which way this is displaying. And check out other related content down here. Finally, if you have... finally, what sort of project are you working on? Since this video is largely about packaging, I'd love to know who you want to star in your next project. Drop it in the comments, and I might just interact there myself. Thank you again so much, and see you next week.